Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Satan and Coffee. It is Friday, November 21st, 2025. If you didn't know that already. I mean, I'm assuming you guys knew that already, right? Because it's the day. It's the day. The year is almost over. 2025 has gone by in a ridiculous flash, I think. So, this morning, I don't really have anything to bitch and complain about. I mean, I always have something to bitch and complain about, but can't think of anything really pertinent or important enough to bring up this morning to bitch and complain about, to bring to your guys' attention. Okay, maybe I do. So, yesterday, it was funny. So, somebody had decided to use Daira's content to spread misinformation regarding demonolatry, using incorrect phrasing. And then after disrespecting Daira and Daira calling Dude out about it, Dude hits Daira up in the DMs and starts kissing her ass like horribly. And she obviously passes her phone off to me. She's like, "Here, you take care of this." And so I found that entertaining and funny. The lengths that people will go just to try to spark up a conversation with her. I find it completely funny, and I don't think he was expecting me to respond. He spent probably I essentially told him, I said, "Put your dick back in your pants and stop acting like you're clever." And then it took him like 10 minutes to respond, and then we just blocked him. So there was that. It's just a lack of respect, man. It's just the lack of general respect across the board. You know, people think that they're in some type of special category or some shit. It's just kind of ridiculous. But I think that's pretty much it to kind of bitch about, right? So this morning, what we're going to be talking about, ego death versus ego apotheosis, which is something I don't think I've seen many people to actually talk about. But in order to kind of have this conversation, I think we kind of have to talk about the differences between the two, right? Or at least my view on the differences and definitions, the core definitions of both, right? So, core definition that I find with ego death is dissolution of the sense of self. The identity collapses or becomes empty, often framed as transcendence through self erasure, right? So, deleting the self and ascending or transcending by deleting the self. The goal of it is detachment, non-self, or merging with something greater, used in kind of like Buddhist, psychedelic, and kind of mystical contexts. Ego apotheosis, however, is ascension of the self. Identity becomes sharper, stronger, more integrated. Goal is self-creation and conscious sovereignty. You expand, refine, and elevate the ego. This is used in Luciferianism, the occult, and Western individualist frameworks. Now, the relationship to identity. Ego death treats identity as a problem, sees selfhood as illusion, attempts to dissolve personal boundaries, often leads to temporary extended sense of nothingness. Ego apotheosis, however, treats identity as a tool, sees selfhood as the core conscious existence, strengthens boundaries, not erases them, builds a deliberate identity rather than default conditioning, right? So the psychological process is involved in this, right? So ego death can be destabilizing if not integrated. Common pitfalls: disassociation, nihilism, bypassing emotions, requires careful reintegration, or people drift into delusion, often mistaken for enlightenment when it's really avoidance. Apotheosis requires disciplined self-awareness, shadow integration instead of shadow rejection. It leads to clarity, purpose, and stability. It focuses on transforming weakness into capability. Right? Now, the relationship to power. With ego death, power comes from surrendering the self. Idealizes passivity, acceptance, non-resistance, often used to escape responsibility or discomfort. I am nothing becomes a spiritual badge. Apotheosis, power comes from conscious will. Idealizes mastery, self-direction, responsibility. You stand accountable for what you create. I decide who I become is the guiding principle. Okay? The relationship to emotion and drive with ego death. It attempts to quiet instinct, desire, ambition, views, passion is egoic noise. Emotional neutrality is the prize. Apotheosis uses emotion and desire as raw material. Passion is fuel, not a flaw. The goal is not calm, the goal is power through clarity. Right? We're going to be breaking down all these concepts even further here in a little bit. Right? So spiritual orientation. With ego death, it aligns with transcendence. Goal is to return to the source or unity. Movement inward dissolving. With apotheosis, it aligns with immanence. Goal is to rise as a sovereign being. Movement is upward becoming. And the overall outcome here, right? What would you talk about, like the outcome? So ego death, if done well, temporary dissolution followed by insight. If done poorly, collapse of functioning, escapism, spiritual bypass. With apotheosis, if done well, a strong, coherent, integrated self capable of real transformation. If done poorly, inflated ego, delusions of grandeur, and narcissism. So, I mean, both of them got their pitfalls, right? The Luciferian position. This is where the real divide lands here, right? So, ego death contradicts Luciferianism. Luciferianism demands agency, identity, sovereignty, responsibility, and rebellion. You cannot rebel without a self. You cannot create without an ego. Apotheosis aligns with Luciferianism. It is the deliberate elevation of the self into a chosen form, not a default one. It's self-authority in its highest expression. So the bottom line, ego death removes the self to escape suffering. Apotheosis rebuilds the self to transcend limits. One ends in silence, the other ends in power. Right? One collapses, the other ascends. One dissolves identity, the one exalts it. Right? So this is kind of like a detailed breakdown of the difference between the two of these things, right? And I think the thing is we generally have a lot of conversations regarding, right, ego death, and we like to talk about ego death like a lot. Like, I'm noticing like ego death is like a very popular buzzword in the occult, generally speaking. And it's kind of irritating, you know. You think ego death is a lie? I don't think it's inherently. I don't think it's a lie. I think some people, especially like if you work through like Sophotic systems, ego death is kind of definitely an aspect of that, right? Like ego death became popular through kind of like internalized spiritual alchemical processes. Right, so the natural kind of alchemical process of, you know, the old self dying and then a new self being reborn. But you don't have to completely murder the old self, you know, for a new self to come up. A new self is born like every day, right? Like, so new ideas, new processes, things like that, right? That you, as your mind changes, your spirit changes, you know, you're constantly, you don't have to sacrifice who and what you are. to be a newer or better version of yourself. Sometimes destroying the old self isn't what's necessary. Sometimes you feel like you need to kill the old self. You need to end the old self and kind of be reborn into this new ideal of what you want to be. And sometimes what's actually missing is just kind of like really kind of moving into yourself, right? Like accepting who you are. I think it's a hard balance to strike, right? Because yeah, if you're, lazy as shit and you don't want to work and you're living on the streets and you're getting high every day, and there aren't many fucking redeeming qualities to you, maybe an ego death is kind of necessary. Maybe you need to understand that the world isn't the problem, you are. Excuse me. But I also believe, though, that, and what is the word? Any intel? Not the subject for this morning. All that we know was mentioned last week on Apocrypha on Saturday, and that's it. Like, it's kind of like all that's going to be mentioned. But I do appreciate you being here. So there are moments where ego death or the death of the identified self is a necessary process. And one second. Sorry, had to clear my throat there. Oh, now I got that song stuck in my head. The "Let Me Clear My Throat," right? So, not sure what I got going on here, but I might be getting sick. But so sometimes an ego death, or kind of like the death of self, or the death of like the identified self, like is necessary for a newer self to kind of emerge. But then there's other times where if you kind of get stuck in that process where you constantly think, like almost like a defense mechanism, if you're constantly thinking that like, I need to completely destroy like everything that I am and rebuild, from ground zero. If that's like your go-to, like in everything, is like you might want to wait a second and kind of re-examine your shit, because sometimes leaning into the self is what's necessary, because sometimes you went through that process, and I don't think it is. I don't think that ego death is a natural process. I think it's a forced process. People force themselves to go through it. Especially if you go through like actually what it is, right? Which we just did. We just went through like the whole line of like the differentials between ego death and ego apotheosis, right? And the thing is ego death is more celebrating kind of like Buddhist or kind of like Apothic systems and frameworks. It is kind of more used for that. But the problem is people have this obsession with this idea that I need to go through an ego death. Like, it's like, shut the fuck up. Not to blur ego death with enlightenment. Yeah, pretty much. And so sometimes what's needed is to lean into the self, lean into the ego, especially like if we look at Satanism, Luciferianism, we look at, the left-hand path in general as a philosophy with its heavy leanings on Jungian psychology, right? We understand that Jung understood that, the avoidance of the ego is detrimental to the self. It is the individuation through integration, right? Individuation is the idea of what we is on the left-hand path, or Luciferianism would call self-deification, right? So individuation through integration of the shadow into the ego, lean into the self, add to the self, don't destroy the self, right? Add what has been missing. Replace certain things, right? Things that you avoided or moved away from or were afraid of. Sometimes leaning further into the ego, leaning further into the self is what is necessary for that elevation. Ego death is not the only process. Ego apotheosis, I see it as part of two different paths. Ego death generally being sought by people on the right-hand path, and ego apotheosis generally being sought by people on the left-hand path, generally speaking. That could be an aspect of it, but I do know that ego death is definitely, like, it is popularized through the left-hand path. Again, like I said, through Klipothic systems. Like when you're working through the Klipoth, like, ego death is kind of part of it. You know what I mean? And I'm not completely disagreeing with you, Tyrant King 666. I'm not completely disagreeing with you. Like, I do think that there are moments in life where ego death is a natural process. Like, the moment that your innocence dies, right, as a child, right? The moment that you, and I identify, like the death of innocence being kind of like, you know, the moment that you realize that you're going to die, the moment you realize your own mortality, like you truly understand your own mortality, is when innocence dies. And the death of innocence is, to some degree, an ego death, because the ego at that time, like a child's ego, is much larger than, you know, an adult ego. Because a child is usually only focused on the self, right? And what the self wants and what the self needs. And that's just like a natural instinct. And so a child has the idea that, you know, they have eternity to do everything and anything that they want to do, right? And so once you become self-aware to the point that you understand your own mortality, and that at one day, could be tomorrow, you're going to die, innocence dies. And I believe that's like the first ego death, because the mentality changes. Everything in the person changes. Now, usually a child or an adolescent isn't equipped to kind of walk through that process and integrate it, which is then where we get, you know, teenage rebellion and, you know, ridiculous behavior and stuff like that. It's a perfect example of what happens when an ego death happens. But then even through that ego death, they try to integrate and lean further into the self, and then you get teenage rebellion, teenage angst, all of this stuff happens, right? So it's a perfect example of how, if you don't know how to, you know, handle that process and integrate it, you know, you can start making really bad decisions. Now, not every child ends up making a shit ton of bad decisions and getting hooked on drugs and partying and shit like that. That doesn't happen to every single child. Some children are better equipped from, you know, how their parents have raised them to kind of integrate that idea and concept, right? But I do believe that that's probably the first ego death that we as human beings deal with, is the death of innocence, right? That understanding of, I'm going to die someday. Like, and not just as kind of like a loose concept, but being fully conscious and aware that my body is finite. So I believe that that's the first ego death that we go through. So I do believe to some degree, in certain ways, yes, it is a natural process. But I feel like there's a lot of times that people try to force it because they're not, you know, 100. Wait, let's see. It's only for sure is death. I'm 100%. Ego death is the destruction of ego and understanding that returning to the no, that I think is bullshit. That I think is bullshit. Ego death. So what is the ego? Well, if we go with Jungian psychology, and you guys know that that's my definition of how I'm going to describe the ego. The ego is how you identify yourself. It's what you project to the world, right? Usually people use the ego as their You know, their identifying marker of who they are as a person. Now, we're not talking about ego in the sense of you're egotistical, right? See, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's not pride, right? Not in this sense, not in the Jungian sense, right? See, when you look at like kind of like the Buddhist ideas, ego, yes, it's pride. Ego is pride, and so pride is a dangerous thing, at least in most spiritual paths. In the Jungian sense, ego is simply the aspect of self that we project to the world, the part that we feel safe projecting to the world, the part that society has told us it's okay to show this part, right? This is safe, right? And so the ego and the shadow are all part of the self, right? It is to a certain degree, like prior to like an ego death, if you're not going through the apotheosis and you are going on like the ego death side of things, yes, it is the false self, and usually is the false self, especially when you first get on this path, right? When you get on this type of spiritual path, it usually is a type of false self, because you're just projecting what people have told you is safe. The shadow is just everything that is you that you don't show anybody. Now, this could be positive things, it could be negative things, it could be things that you enjoy, it could be things that you're afraid of. Like normally when people think of the shadow, people are thinking, well, you know, these are my traumas. And yes, that's included in it, of course. Like your trauma, if not integrated, if not dealt with, is definitely a part of your shadow. But that is not the only thing that is the shadow. There's like hundreds of things that you could think of off the top of your head that help define you as a person, things that you enjoy and things that you thought were great. You know, think of it this way, like when you're a kid and you sing like shit, but you love singing songs. It makes you feel good, right? So you put your headphones on and you just yell to the world and you sound horrible. And, you know, because you sound horrible, your parents come up to your room and say, shut up, you know, you don't sound good, this, that, and the next thing. That part of you gets moved to the shadow. It's still something you enjoy. You don't stop enjoying it. But because society is telling you, this is something that you shouldn't, you know what I mean, that you shouldn't be enjoying, or because, you know, you don't have this ability or power, like whatever, it gets moved to the shadow. So shadow integration, I never was anything but what they want to see. Death metal edition. I never had a mask. I think we all do, though. I think we all do, right? Like, I think to say that we've never had a mask is, I think there's something missing there, right? I think there's something that hasn't been aligned to, right? We've all put a mask on for someone or something, and for a reason, right? It's all about safety. Now, being the truest version of yourself, that's great. I'm, you know, proud of you for that, you know, but I think that is the ego speaking, right? Like, I've never had a mask. I've always been me. That screams to me much louder than anything else. That someone that does have a mask that they don't want to accept, that they're not, you know, that they're not aligned with, right? Wyatt, welcome. So Wyatt is going to fill the chat with word vomit. Don't mind him. He's working his own process. Reviews a lot of cash. Fair enough. And it's like, don't misunderstand me. I'm not calling you out, and I'm not saying that you're full of shit or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, in my experience, when somebody tells me I've never worn a mask, I've worn hundreds of masks. You know, you know, this is right now, this version of myself, this version of myself is probably the freest version that I've ever been. And I specifically say this because, you know, in a previous relationship of mine, I you know, wore, you know, a very heavy mask. I completely changed who I was. You know, I didn't dress the way that I wanted to dress. I stopped listening to the music that I wanted to listen to. You know, all of these things. Like, I became somebody that, like, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't know who the fuck I was looking at. And, you know, it was in direct contradiction to everything I stand for. You're 55, you feel like you haven't changed. Like, you know, I look at myself, I'm 40. And, you know, I mean, I'm still painting the nails, you know, I'm still me. But I had to go through something of not being me in order to fully appreciate and lean into, you know, who I am. And I sit and I look at, there's Al Jorgensen from Ministry. And I'm like, dude, that's what I want to be at like 70. Like, I saw like a thing that Al did with, Cold Chamber a few years back when they were doing their reunion tour and their reunion album, right? And so Al Jorgensen, you know, helped on a few tracks, and I watched the making of, and I saw what this guy looked like, and he's like 70 something. I'm like, bruh, that's me at like 70. Like, you know, like that's me. Or like Tim Burton. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen like Tim Burton like 10 years ago. Dude was like 65, 70, like buff as all fuck, covered in tattoos, like just rocking out on stage. Or not Tim Burton. What was it? No, his the guy that he did the music for Tim Burton. What was his name? I can't remember his name. You guys know what I'm talking about. Grandpa Slam. You go rock on, Tyrant, rock on. You know, so like, you know, I just saw that and I was like, yes, that is the direction I am going with this. So anyway, right? So what people get wrong about ego is our first section here, right? So ego death is used a lot as for escapism. Ego apotheosis is misinterpreted as narcissism. The ego is structure, not pathology, right? Is what kind of needs to be looked at. Great role model. Agreed. You know, so people talk about ego the way they talk about exes, right? Blame everything on it. Pretend they let it go, then recreate the same problems because they never built anything better, right? So Jung is the ego is a mediator of consciousness, right? And in the left-hand path requires agency, not erasure. Killing the ego kills the will, right? Like the Exodus of a great band, right? Ah, I knew it. He couldn't resist. Everything. How can you prove that you're in front of a camera? What's a camera? Yeah, I've put a lot of work, I've put a lot of thought into this, like after talking to you guys, Wyatt, right? There are terms and understandings that we have to understand the world around us. We can ask what is everything and understand nothing. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, this is just my personal opinion. You keep working your process, man. But I'm just going to be honest with my opinion. I honestly think that mentality. So, because I remember that mentality, right? Like back like in 1999 when The Matrix came out. And that was my mentality back when I was like 15, 16, right? Like I was like maybe 16, 17, maybe, right? When the Matrix came out, I think. And I had that mentality, right? Like the whole questioning reality, because that is a Matrix philosophy. I mean, granted, the philosophies that were used in the Matrix were taken from other things, but for modern era understanding, it's a Matrix philosophy, right? It's the, how do you, like what is reality? Perception is reality. Perception is nothing more than electrical signals interpreted by your brain, which means the brain can misinterpret, electrical signals and something be real that isn't. So it is the concept of everything is real and nothing is real at the same time. And in my personal opinion, I think it's a cop-out because people use it to people like the 15-year-old me used it to sound deep, right? Like I would tell kids at school, well, like, well, walk out of the room, right? It is like this desk. You think that desk is really there? Walk out of the room. Is it still there? You can't see it, touch it, taste it, feel it, smell it. Is it still there? There's no electrical signals for your brain to interpret. Does it still exist? And so it's just kind of like, you know, a lot of people back then were right to kind of look at me like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, they were so right to tell me that. Because, like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, right? You're in front of a camera. What is the camera? Who are you, right? Yeah. Well, these are all questions that we essentially we ask ourselves. But the thing is there has to come a point where you have to accept some level of reality, or you're just going to go into fucking psychosis. Because not everything is a question. It's like saying that, like, it's like the people that say like everything is inherently political. And I completely disagree with that fucking statement. I think everything can be politicized, but that doesn't make it inherently political. People misinterpret and use that term incorrectly, like inherently. Inherently means that like the base function of something is political for it to be inherently political. If the fundamental function of a thing isn't politics, right? It isn't inherently fucking political. Like can we agree on the fucking words that we, you know, the English language has in the goddamn dictionary and what it means and how to use it, right? Can things be politicized? Everything can be politicized. Not everything is inherently fucking political. Get over yourself. And it's the same concept with kind of like this whole idea of, you know, question every single individualistic aspect of reality because everything and nothing is real at the same time. It's a cop-out. Like, how can you ascend in anything if nothing exists? If everything and nothing exists at the same time and we're constantly, perpetually smashing ourselves in the head of, how can I prove that this is real? How can I prove that I'm real? Right? Do me a favor. Don't actually do this. Please don't actually do this. Don't do this. One more time. Do not do this. Go to the wall, find a brick wall, smash your fucking head into it 3 or 4 times, right? I promise you, you're going to have a headache afterwards. That's reality, right? It's trust me, the wall is there, right? And your head, your brain, and the pain that you're going to need an aspirin for later will verify all of that. Right? So that's kind of the thing. Yes, there is a level of this idea that exists that we need to kind of question, but I think some people just go way the fuck overboard with it. And it's just kind of like, if you are questioning that much and you have no sense of self, right? Like at all. Because the thing is like, I don't believe that people can be defined as one thing or another. I think that like the most genuine answer I can give to somebody about who I am as a person is I am who I am. And somebody, well, who is that? It's whoever I am in this moment. There are too many things about me as an individual for me to pick one fucking thing and define myself that way. Right? You would have to spend years, you have to spend time with someone to know who they are. You cannot describe who you are. Right? Most people default to what they do, what they listen to, stuff like that. Am I a cultist? Yep. But I'm also a systems engineer. I'm also a graphic designer. I'm also a father. I'm also a husband. I'm also a brother. I'm also, you know, a son. You know, I'm, you know, also a geek. I'm a metalhead. But then I also like rap, and I also like, you know, trap music. So none of those things define me. Right? Because I am all of those things and a lot more. So I am who I am. I am. Right? Usually, so when I have dreams, let me just put it this way. First and foremost, I don't remember most of my dreams. Right. So most of the time when I'm dreaming, I don't remember shit. And when I do remember my dreams, dude, they look like those weird fucking like the only way I know how to describe those like weird fucking Sora videos. Those are my dreams. That's so no. Like if I throw a ball in my dream, chances are it's probably going to sink into the wall and become part of the wall. And then the wall's going to smack me in the face. Like it's like, like I get the point that you're trying to make. But the thing is like your subconscious, to the point that you're trying to make, your subconscious simply tries to mirror reality as best as it can, right? The subconscious is not a good marker as to what reality is, because here's the thing. Generally speaking, in dreams, you can't read in dreams. Like you can see text, and I've had this happen where like I try to text somebody on my phone, but I can't see my phone. Like if I think back to the dream, I couldn't see anything on my phone. Like I knew I had my phone, I knew what I was doing on my phone, but I couldn't see anything on my phone. Now some people have reported, oh, I can read in dreams. It's like, sure, cool. Okay, then you're psychotic. Generally speaking. But most of your dreams look like video games, either a fever dream or a nightmare. Yeah, like, I mean, so, for me, it's just like, we have to have some, as human beings, we have to agree that we have to agree with ourselves, not the rest of the world. We have to agree with ourselves where we believe reality begins and where we believe reality ends, regardless of whether or not that reality is different from the rest of the world. And now that if your reality is different from the rest of the world, then, people are going to think you're psychotic. Other people might think you're a seer. But there has to be like everything and nothing can exist simultaneously. Oh, you're dreaming. I don't know. Never mind. No. It's okay. It's okay. Like, I'm not shutting you down, man. Like, I mean, throw out your ideas. Like, ask your questions. Don't let anyone ever shut you down. I'm not trying to shut you down. Right? Like that's not what this is. Right? But I have to, I can't pretend that I agree. I just can't, right? Like, but please don't misinterpret it. Like, I'm not trying to shut you down. Like, I'm not trying to tell you to stop or anything like that, It's just, it's my experience, because the thing is everything that you guys talk about, I've been there, right? I've been there. I've said all of that shit, and yeah, maybe that's part of my shadow. I don't know. Like, because like so many times, like, I would talk that shit to people at school and stuff, but they'd just they'd look at me like, dude, shut the fuck up, you fucking weirdo. Like, and, I felt deep at that point, but then like through my own processes talking about ego death, that's kind of what I went through. That's kind of what happened, right? Like, I was like, okay, like I literally sat down with myself and was like, yes, I do believe that there is something here, like in this philosophy, in this idea that makes sense and is necessary to be looked at, examined, and kind of like applied to certain situations. But is it realistic of me to, obsessively and arrogantly apply this to fucking everything? Does that even make sense to me? And at the end of the day, the answer was no, it doesn't fucking make sense to me. It's like, this is fucking dumb. Why can't everything and nothing exist simultaneously? Because nothing is the absence of everything. It's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction. The concept of everything and nothing existing simultaneously is not what people make it out to be. It is to say that it is not what you perceive it to be. That's the thing. See, the idea of everything and nothing existing simultaneously is a misinterpreted concept. The concept is that the things that exist, everything that exists, may exist in a way or other ways that you're not seeing, right? The whole concept of there is no spoon. There is a spoon, but the spoon isn't what you think it is. See, that's the thing. It's not saying the spoon doesn't exist. It does, but it doesn't exist in the way that you believe that it exists. And it is because you believe that it exists in that way that limits your understanding of what it could potentially be. Right? That's where that comes from. That's what that means. Right? It isn't to say that it's here, but it's also not here. Like, no, it's there. It exists. It's real. But how deep does your understanding of that thing's existence go? Is it just a spoon, or is it more than that? Right? And then when you go beyond that, then you start to kind of go into the rabbit hole of, does it exist as I perceive it? And therefore, if it exists as I perceive it, then if I perceive it differently, does it change? Or is it just my perception? Or is my perception the reality? Because the argument here is people believe perception is reality. It's your perception of reality is your reality. But that only makes it real or unreal to you, not to everyone else. It is a subjective thing. Your perception is subjective. Therefore, when we talk about truth, and we've talked about this in the past, truth is based on facts. Can facts change? Yes, of course facts can change, but there's a process to changing facts. They don't just change, right? Right? Because truth is based on facts. And so therefore, truth is not subjective, it is objective. It is an objective truth. Your perception of reality is subjective and changes based on you and only you. Now, with the way the world works, you might find, 100,000 people that agree with you. And then you live in an echo chamber and, everything's hunky-dory because everyone fucking agrees with you. But still, within that subjective idea of perception, everything each individual perceives, they perceive it slightly differently, and therefore that perception of reality is still slightly different to each individual person. Meaning, your individual subjective perception of reality does not reflect objective truth. So, and everybody has their own perception of what reality is, right? I mean, just look at the state of the world today. But just because everyone has their own subjective perception of reality does not change the objective truth. Simply because you're incapable of seeing an objective truth or accepting an objective truth, not you specifically, use in a general term, does not negate its existence. Can we experience anything outside of our perception? I think you can. I think you can experience things outside of your perception. And I think that this is where people's concepts of reality break down. I think this is where psychosis happens a lot, with people that live so blatantly inside of their own perceptions. When a wake-up call comes and they realize that that's not what reality is, they break down. They fall apart. Because the thing that was holding them together, the whole concept started to fall apart at the seams. We've seen it quite a bit. It's stupid example. If you look at Ed Gein, right? Ed Gein had a perception of serial killers are a good idea, or people that live in psychosis are kind of a good idea of this, right? or like sociopaths, because what happens is they have a very extreme concept of their own perception of reality. And then when true reality comes in and breaks down what they believe to be true, they fall apart. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. Cult leaders, it's the same thing. Like a cult leader will do the same thing. Like I believe people that lean so hard into this are basically fucking cult leaders. Like they will bend reality however they see fit to make people follow them. And then when they reach a certain point, right, a lot of the time where they can no longer make people believe the lie or believe the false perception, they make them drink Kool-Aid, you know? So like, think about it. Like, I mean, if you think about the whole Jim Jones thing, right? That was what that was, right? He amassed like a ridiculous following, and the only way that he was able to continue that was in death, was to kill everybody. That was the only way that he could do it. Beyond your own perception implies that we exist beyond our own perception. See, again, you're asking, what are we? Does it matter? Does it really matter? Like, what are we? You're a human being. You're Homo sapien, right? End of story, right? Scientific fact. No getting past it, right? You're not a fucking alien. You're not, you're not stardust, right? You're a fucking human being, right? You're a Homo sapien, right? I mean, I understand the whole concept of scientifically breaking thing down to like a molecular level. Like that's where that whole like, oh, I'm stardust, fuck off, right? So existing beyond your perception, you exist in your perception. Like your mind creates a perception of the things around you that may or may not inherently reflect what reality is. And the thing is if you can't see reality, then no, that reality doesn't exist to you. But does that mean that reality doesn't exist? No, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that you can't fucking see it. That's the only thing that means. You can't see it. And then you have to sit there and think, okay, then this super like, fluffy foo-foo fucking, spiritual idea completely breaks apart. Because if you can't exist beyond your own perception and your perception of reality is completely fucking distorted, then you can't see reality. You can't see the forest for the trees. You're just too focused on one tree. What we're talking about ego death and ego apotheosis is what we were talking about. Thanks, Wyatt. Anyway, right? So ego death, the origins and modern misuse. Okay, so mystical roots of it is in like Buddhism, Gnosticism, psychedelics, right? And like the New Age culture kind of turned it into like emotional sedation, right? Is kind of what happened. With ego death, like the identity collapses without reconstruction, right? So it's about kind of like destroying, like the whole concept that people focus on is like, oh, I need to, like my concept of self needs to be completely dismantled, right? And like the emotional dangers of this is like, disassociation, nihilism, and spiritual bypassing, right? Right? We are a mind using the brain to interface with the physical world through the brain case body. Yes, we are an organic computer system, essentially. Which is kind of like where like, that whole idea of like organic, like technology comes from, like in some movies and shit like that, because we are essentially that, right? All living creatures are essentially like an organic computer system that has processing limits, So ego death is the abyss with no rope. People convince themselves they're enlightened while standing knee-deep in avoidance. Emptiness is not power, right? So studies on psychedelic ego disillusion and integration failure have been done, and this is where a lot of this is kind of coming from. and what we're talking about as far as kind of like the disassociation, the nihilism, spiritual bypassing, all of that stuff. There are common psychological symptoms post ego death, and experiences that people have had. And so this is kind of like what we're looking at, right? So this idea of kind of restricting the self or holding the self back or destroying the self in order to try to ascend and connect to something greater. And at the end of the day, we're talking about integration. Integration is necessary at post-ego death. You need to integrate. So here's the thing. If it's all good, man. If you go through ego death, and with ego death, you try to ascend and connect with something greater than yourself. The idea of integration, what are you integrating? If the self does not exist any longer, and what's ascending? What's integrating? Right? And so people go through this whole, this ego death process without any understanding of the necessity of integration, the integration of anything, because the self no longer exists, so there's nowhere to integrate. I'm not saying that ego death doesn't happen, but I think it's overused. I don't even think it's inherently or necessarily misused, but I do think it's overused, right? Not everything is an inherent need for ego death, right? So what does ego apotheosis actually mean? So apotheosis as ascension of the self, not inflation. Luciferian principle is to illuminate, refine, and rebuild, right? It's integration, not annihilation. Ego death is annihilation of the ego. Ego apotheosis is the integration, and through integration, the ascension of the self and the ego, right? Leaning into who you are, right? And who you are as only you can understand who you are. You do not need to be able to define who you are as a person in order to integrate and to ascend. Like to lean into the self. You just need to have an understanding. You know who you are. I know who I am. I can't tell you who I am, but I know who I am, right? And that's all the only thing that fucking matters, right? So ego apotheosis leans into discipline over indulgence. And it's one thing that I always kind of talk about is the necessity of discipline, guys. The necessity of consistency, right? Like the professional shows up even when they don't want to, right? Like, so for example, I was a half an hour late this morning. Do you think I wanted to do the podcast this morning? Like laying in bed? No, I didn't want to fucking wake up this morning. Like I was upstairs, I was laying in bed, I was holding Dyra, baby's laying on the side, Like I wanted to stay in fucking bed. That's where I wanted to stay. But I showed up. The professional shows up when they don't want to. Discipline. That takes discipline. That's what that is. Right? And it's something, unfortunately, a lot of people in society today are fucking missing. People are missing fucking discipline. They don't have discipline. And it's really sad. It's really sad that they don't. Right? And so, sorry, I'm logging into work because, I have to log into work at 9 and it's 8:59 right now for me. So, just log into work, kind of getting that ball rolling while we continue. So, yeah, it's my day off. I'm glad I got up early. I didn't know you were on today. Yeah, I'm on, it's Wednesdays. Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Sundays are 2-hour episodes. Sometimes we go longer on days like today. Sometimes, not always. On Wednesday, I think we went like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes if you count the intro. The intro I usually let run for 10 minutes, and that's just to make sure that all you guys are here. So that's kind of what that is. Anyway, let's keep going, right? So you do not become a god. You do not go through individuation, self-deification by disappearing. You become your own god by deciding what part of you deserves to survive. Nietzsche said, becoming what you are already. Right? Lucifer, if we look at Lucifer as an archetype in this context, it's of conscious ascent, the conscious process of ascending, of going through the ranks. So apotheosis in practice, shadow confrontation. We talk about ego and shadow, right? Rock on. Appreciate the dedication there. Definitely. So we talk about ego and shadow as simultaneous existing. And again, this could be looked at as everything and nothing, right? So like the shadow would be the nothing and the ego would be the everything, right? So it's what's visible and what's not visible. So if you talk about nothing in the sense of not the absence of existence, but rather a hidden existence, then we might have something. But if we're using the definition of nothing as in the absence of existence, cannot exist and not exist simultaneously. You can't, right? And then, like, I know there are people who be like, well, prove to me you exist. It's like, well, prove to me that I don't. Because you're interacting with me. So, if I don't exist, you just lost your fucking argument right there. Right? Prove to me you exist. You're fucking talking to me, you dumbass. There you go. So, there's that can tie in. Skill building, emotional literacy, and strategic thinking. Again, apotheosis in practice, right? We focus on emotional literacy and strategic thinking. Emotional literacy, what is that? Some people call emotional literacy emotional intelligence. I think that's a good word for it, emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. Think strategically, think intelligently, right? Like, come up with your own ideas. Don't follow a pack of people because you agree with them. Integrate what it is that they're presenting, that they're putting down for you, that you agree with, but don't fall into the process of following people because you agree with a portion of what they say, right? It's one of the reasons why, politically, I say I'm politically homeless, because are there things I agree with on the left? Yep. Are there things I agree with on the right? Yep. Are there things I disagree on both sides? Yep. There's more that I disagree with on both sides than there is that I agree with. So I take the things that I agree with, and that becomes who I am. That's me as a person. Does that make me Democrat? Does that make me a Republican? Fuck no. I'm neither of those things. Like, I don't believe that you should be one or the other. If you identify that way, then cool. But I don't. Right? Even if I lean more one way or the other, I still don't identify with either of them because I don't encompass the belief, right? I don't feel safe in it. I don't feel comfortable in it. Sheep in wolf's clothing. Be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Uh-huh. Pretty much. I like that. That's good. That's very true, right? So, long-term construction of a stable self is apotheosis in practice. Lean into the self. Like, don't run away from yourself. Don't be afraid of who you are, right? If not everyone understands you, I mean, think about me, guys. I mean, the thing is like, I mean, I'm so grateful, like, for all of you, but like throwing out like, how I label myself, how I identify myself, just to give people an understanding of who or what it is that I am. You know, yeah, I've gotten heat for it, and not as much heat as I thought I was going to, but you know, I still got heat for it. You know, the whole idea of like, you know, I'm a conservative goth Satanist, right? And Satanist as just like kind of like a general term, right? I guess Luciferian is more accurate at this point than Satanist, but you know, simply for the left-hand path philosophy, just so people, you know, have a better idea what it is I'm talking about. And you know, I've had people tell me that I can't be that, right? I just double down. You can't tell me that I don't exist. You don't have the right. That's simple. You do not have the right to tell me that I don't exist, because I do. And so the construction of a stable self. I am stable in who I am as a person. I am consistent with who I am as a person. Right? Choosing values you actually live by is another step of this. Choose the values that align with you. Again, are there things on the left I agree with? Are there things on the right I agree with? Yep, 100%. But I don't identify as Republican or Democrat, because that's not me. Like, I'm neither of those things. I choose the values that I actually live by, things that I'm comfortable with, that I believe in, that I truly believe in. External validation is not required. Exactly, Maeve. Yes, external validation. Oh, that is, you know, you, and that's what you are. And he said, how is that possible? Right? I mean, most people, there's a lot of people that are kind of confused, you know, by that concept, but that's because they fall into that trap of everything's inherently political, and it's not. Can it be politicized? Yes, it can. Everything can be politicized, but that does not mean that everything is inherently political. The fundamental idea is not created or constructed around the concept of politics of the time or currently. Now, if you as a practitioner choose to incorporate your politics into your beliefs, that is your decision, but that does not make it inherently political. Can the philosophies and the idea align with your politics? Yep, that also means that you are politicizing it. That does not make it inherently political. Some people in the past suffered some political violence because of their beliefs. Yep, that still does not make that belief inherently political. That is not what inherently means. Use the right fucking words. It's that goddamn simple. It really is, right? So going through this, like, with a way to kind of do like ego apotheosis, kind of like a technique process, right? So inventory of reality exercises, internal conflict mapping, values testing under pressure, right? If your ego collapses under a bad day, it was never real. Apotheosis requires a self that doesn't shatter when stressed. And that is the basis. You can still change through ego apotheosis, but it's reconstruction, not destruction. It's rebuilding a version of self that can withstand pressure. Right? Now, pitfalls and like ethical considerations here, right? So distinguish apotheosis from self-obsession, right? Avoid superiority complexes masquerading as sovereignty. Ethical ego, responsibility for consequences. Be responsible. Be a good human. Don't be a jackass. Be better. And Luciferian ethics, freedom paired with accountability, right? Practice your freedom. Do not infringe on others' freedom, and be accountable for your actions. Ego without responsibility is just a toddler with a flamethrower. Apotheosis without ethics rots from the inside. Right? So integration with left-hand path philosophy here. So the ego as a ritual vessel. Ego must be maintained for magical identity. Sovereignty is the outcome of individuation, and apotheosis is in alignment with infernal principles, left-hand path principles, right? A fragmented ego cannot hold power. You cannot channel flame if the vessel leaks. You will just burst into flames, right? So, again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I know it was a little bit late, but we still got through it, right? We still went over a fucking hour today. Because I only did 5 minutes of the intro this time. So I thought that this was an interesting one. And again, this isn't to say that you should preface or that you should prefer ego apotheosis over ego death. I do think that both have their place. Both can work in certain situations if done correctly, but both require integration. Both require an understanding of integration, how integration happens. I prefer working through apotheosis than death, only because I like who I am as a person. And I want to see myself grow and become the best version of myself. And so therefore, I don't need to destroy who I am. I just need to change what needs to be changed and reconstruct and become better. Better for myself, better for my family, better for my community, every day. So, as always, thank you all so very much for being here today. You guys are fucking amazing. You're the reason I do this. And as always, hail thy fucking self. We'll see you in the next one. Peace the fuck out.